What was that like getting into the bit? What year was that?
That was 2000, June 6, 2000 was when I passed my
Okay.
real estate license
What
test. Yeah.
what was
I worked
that
long
like for you?
hours.
What was that like for you? Because I was 22
Yeah.
when I got licensed. What was it? It was a little tough. Mine was probably a little bit easier because internet leads was more of a thing, right? It was easier for me to kind of get business that way. What was it like for you as a 20-year-old? In 2000.
Oh yeah. I'll be honest. Back then, I mean, that was probably 5 or 6 years before. So like 2005, 2006, when I say all the young guys got into the business, like in 2000, like when I got in the business at 20 years old, I was definitely the youngest kid in any room I stood in, right? Like it didn't
Yeah.
matter. Everybody was 40 to 50 years old in the business. There was very seldom. There was a few that trickled in after me from that standpoint before we got to it. But back then we were, you could sit on office duty. You'd sit,
Yeah.
so they'd have agent duty. You'd sit on the desk and answer phone calls that would come into the brokerage and be able to take leads out. There really wasn't anything such as internet leads. We were starting to put internet websites up at the time.
Right.
I was working with my mom. We really weren't on the same team. I was just kind of helping out, and we were getting so many phone calls about land that she had listed. And this is crazy because you don't know what you don't know, right? Like
Right.
now you know what problem we had, and you're like, geez, we didn't really do a really good job of handling that. We were getting so many calls about the land that she would list that we started a website and put all the deed restrictions and we're like, let's put all the information on this website so people will quit calling us so they have the information. Well, then the website launches, and then like that next weekend, I got the same 30 phone calls of people asking questions about the land. And then I got 30 emails from more people asking about it. And like, it was just inundated with, all you did was double down on your leads at that point in time and that was like the beginning. Nobody was sharing listings online or anything like that.
Right. Did you when you got in and being just younger, did you have any certain way of how you focused on growing your business? Because obviously, like a lot of times, like at that age, like our sphere of influence wasn't buying houses typically, right? And you'd have to gain the trust of probably someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s to trust you as their agent to help them with their largest asset, right?
Absolutely.
Um, how did you go about navigating those waters?
Yeah, I think what it was pretty early on, I think it's like with anything else, it is, I didn't, because my mom was in the business. It wasn't like I had that first year of database where I could be like, let me go to my friends and family and sell them all houses. She already had done that
Yeah.
from that standpoint. So for me, it was a lot of the office duty, work the leads. Office duty, work the leads. I'll never forget the first one I got. I went on a listing appointment in Delaware, knocked on the door, and let me remind you, I looked like I was 12 when I was 20.
Yeah.
Like I could barely grow a beard when I was 20, so I looked young. Knocked on the door, and I remember the guy like opened the door and he like looked out there and he was like, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm here to list your house." Like he's like, he goes, "You see this thing?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "You need to grow one." I grew this when I was 25 in the sales business, literally what he said to me. So walked into the house, ended up getting the listing because he just wanted to give me a shot, like
Yeah.
young in the business from that standpoint. But I think early on, it's building a knowledge base. Like I really just dove into understanding scripts and dialogues. Even back then, a lot of that was just tapes and stuff, old stuff that was sitting in the office, and learned how to talking tracks that I could use because those talking tracks, if you control the conversation, then you sound like you know what you're talking about, right? When it goes through it. So it's easier to earn people's trust. But my gosh, I mean, that's what I always tell everybody. If you thought it was hard to get an agency disclosure signed now, back then it was a legal size document that was, pressed hard because there's 3 copies of it, had a big state of Ohio seal at the top of it. When I was asking these married couples at 45 years old, I looked like I was 12 to sign it. You'd have thought they had to give their firstborn to me or something. It was hard to get it signed, and you had to get that signed before you could even get them in the house back then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and you brought up talking tracks, I call them conversation flows, whatever you wanna call it, the power of actually studying, I hate using the word scripts, but, whatever those talking points are, whether it's a listing or a buy side, they're all the same. They don't really change much. One buyer conversation flow is probably gonna happen multiple times, and the more comfortable you get with it, the more confident you'll be,
Yep.
the more competent you'll present yourself as well. So, Zach, when you got in, obviously, I always ask because I'm curious. Being young, obviously, you're in. Family was already in the business. Did you have supporters, doubters? Did you go in full time? Did you quit, the job and just jump right in, or how did
Yeah.
you
So
transition?
it kind of ended up being definitely my mom. So being in the business, she has supported me from day one to still to this day. And so at the same time, all that stuff was happening when had got my real estate license. My wife's uncle had offered me a pretty amazing sales job, like gave me basically a territory of 5 states and commercial building products, and said, "Hey, family loves you. They've talked great things about you. I think you're going to be awesome. Like, let's go do this." And so I seen that opportunity, knew I had my real estate license, but it was just too much of a great opportunity to kind of jump over into that sales world. And so I was doing that at the same time, right? Like, so I switched over, started doing that, and I realized, gosh, the training was awful. Sorry if her uncle's watching this, it is what it is. The training was awful. Like, he took me to his best clients and like, "Hey, this is how you do it. You walk in these big buildings, sit into these rooms, and like you talk about it, and then these are all engineered products, so they're spec'd on sheets, and they just buy them, And I'm like, "Oh, awesome." Well, turns out that's not how it works when you don't know them, right? Like, so I had no clients that I knew. None of them. There wasn't a base in the 5 states that I got. Like, I remember like pulling into Barnes and Noble and reading. I literally read sales books. Like, how do I get indoors? Like, and then I'd use a strategy to get into a door and pretend like I knew somebody in the building. They would get me in a door, and started doing that. But I realized real quick I didn't want to be on the road, because that was a road warrior. Like, make your appointments on Monday, travel Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, home on Friday. Every 4 weeks, you're out for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
By that time, my wife was pregnant with our first. We started young, so she's pregnant with our first. Knew I didn't want to be on the road, and so that's where I like 9 months after I started that job, probably, I was like, "Hey, this isn't for me." And I'll be honest with you, I was standing there with no job. Picked up a car payment because he had a car stipend for me, but I bought the car, so he was just paying the stipend. So now I had a
Sure.
car payment. I had health insurance I had to pay for, because he also gave me a health insurance stipend. Now I had health insurance that I had to pay for, and I'm sitting there with is no college degree and a real estate license. Is
Yeah.
is really where it ended up. And so that was kind of that following year. It was 2001, and I jumped in head first, and went to town on it. And it was those calls, open houses, doing everything you could. I think we ended up closing, if I remember right, I think it was we closed 18 transactions, because we won Coldwell Banker's like Rising Star Award that year.
Yeah.
For That's the crazy part. 18 transactions. You're like, now you're like, what? People do that in a
You
month.
you alone? But you alone? 18?
Yeah, it was
Yeah. I mean,
mine. Yep.
shit. I mean, shit, dude. First real full year in the business. That's amazing.
Yeah,
You know
I
what I
know.
mean?
I always expect more of myself, right? Like, it was one of those things where you're like, oh man,